Good thing Richard handled the money, my daughter-in-law whispered at my husband's funeral. Evelyn wouldn't survive a month on her own. She thought I couldn't hear her over the organ music and the soft murmur of condolences filling the chapel, but grief sharpens certain things. Especially humiliation. I kept my eyes on the polished mahogany casket at the front of the room and folded my black gloves carefully in my lap. The white lilies surrounding Richard's coffin smelled too sweet, almost suffocating. 43 years of marriage reduced to flower arrangements and casseroles waiting back at the house. Vanessa stood near the entrance of the chapel in a fitted black dress that probably cost more than most people's mortgage payments. She tilted her head sympathetically every time someone approached me, as if she were already preparing the world for my collapse. "She's taking it very hard," I heard her say softly to one of Richard's golf partners. Richard handled all the finances. Evelyn never really had to worry about those things. The man glanced at me with immediate pity. I recognized that look. It was the same expression people used when visiting nursing homes or seeing an elderly woman struggle to carry groceries. Weak, fragile, dependent. Vanessa had always been talented at creating narratives that benefited her. My son Jason stood beside her near the stained glass windows, his shoulders tense inside his dark gray suit. He avoided looking directly at me. Every so often, he rubbed the back of his neck the way he used to as a teenager when he felt guilty about something. I noticed details like that now. Grief made me observant. Or perhaps Richard's death had finally stripped away the comfortable illusions I'd spent years protecting. The pastor continued speaking about devotion and legacy, but my attention drifted toward the rows of people seated behind me. Neighbors, business associates, country club friends. They all looked at me with gentle sadness, but underneath it, I could feel something else settling into the room. Assumption. They believed what Vanessa wanted them to believe. That Richard Harper had left behind a helpless widow too overwhelmed to survive without him. I lowered my eyes and smoothed the sleeve of my black dress. It was the same dress I'd worn to Jason's wedding 15 years ago. Richard had once told me the color made my eyes look younger. The memory hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, I could almost feel his hand resting against my back like it always had during formal events. Steady, protective, certain. Then the feeling vanished, leaving only the cold silence of the chapel and the ache sitting heavily beneath my ribs. After the service ended, people lined up to offer condolences. Vanessa remained close to me the entire time, guiding conversations before I could answer for myself. Evelyn's considering downsizing, she explained to one woman. The estate is just too much for one person now. Estate. Not home. Never home. I looked past her toward the rain streaking against the chapel windows. Richard had planted every oak tree surrounding our property himself nearly 30 years ago. He used to joke that he trusted trees more than people because trees showed their age honestly. People hid theirs behind smiles. Vanessa touched my arm gently when another guest approached. "We're going to take very good care of her," she said warmly. As if I weren't standing right there. As if I were already becoming something fragile and manageable. I smiled faintly and thanked the guest for coming. My voice sounded calm. Even to me. That seemed to satisfy Vanessa. She relaxed slightly, probably relieved I wasn't causing a scene. She still believed silence meant surrender. But Richard had taught me something important long before this funeral. The quietest person in the room usually knows the most. And I had never mentioned the $28 million. Rain followed us home from the cemetery in a steady gray curtain that blurred the world beyond the car windows. Jason drove in silence, while Vanessa sat beside him checking messages on her phone every few minutes, her diamond bracelet catching flashes of dull afternoon light. I sat in the back seat with my hands folded over my purse, staring at the familiar streets leading toward the house Richard and I had built together nearly 3 decades ago. The closer we got, the more I felt something tightening quietly inside my chest. Not panic. Not even grief exactly. Awareness. The kind that comes when you realize people have already begun rearranging your life while you are still standing inside it. By the time we pulled into the driveway, several cars were already parked along the curb for the reception after the funeral. Warm yellow light glowed through the windows, and I could see silhouettes moving around my kitchen carrying trays and wine glasses. For a brief second, I remembered Christmas parties from years ago when Richard stood near the fireplace laughing with clients, while jazz records played softly in the background. Back then this house felt alive. Safe. Now it felt staged. Like everyone had arrived too early for something I had not agreed to yet. Vanessa stepped out first and immediately switched into her polished hostess voice. "Please come inside and get warm," she called to guests climbing the front steps behind us. "Evelyn needs all the support she can get right now." Support. Another word that sounded kind until you noticed how often people used it when discussing someone they no longer considered capable. I removed my coat slowly in the foyer while guests filled the dining room. The smell of coffee and baked ham drifted through the house, mixing strangely with funeral flowers and wet wool coats. Every surface seemed crowded with casseroles, desserts, sympathy cards, and half-whispered conversations. Richard hated crowded rooms. He used to escape to his office during parties and claim the dog needed company. I almost smiled thinking about it. Then I heard Vanessa speaking again from the kitchen. "Honestly, I do not know what she is going to do," she murmured softly to one of her friends. "Richard handled everything. Bills, investments, taxes. Evelyn has never even used online banking." A few people gave sympathetic little laughs. I stood very still near the staircase and listened. "Jason and I are probably going to move in temporarily," Vanessa continued. "Just until we figure out the property situation." Property situation. There it was again. Not memories. Not family home. Property. One of the women lowered her voice. "Will she have to sell?" Vanessa sighed dramatically. "Most likely. The upkeep alone is enormous." I glanced toward the living room window where rainwater slid slowly down the glass. Richard had once spent an entire summer restoring the porch swing outside because I told him I loved reading there during thunderstorms. He refinished every wooden slat himself. People who planned to erase a home always spoke about square footage before memories. Jason appeared beside me holding 2 cups of coffee. "You okay, Mom?" he asked quietly. His voice sounded tired, but there was distance in it now. Carefulness. Like he was already rehearsing conversations we had not had yet. I accepted the coffee and nodded once. "I am fine." He looked relieved by the simple answer. Too relieved. Across the room, Vanessa was speaking to a man in a navy blazer I did not recognize. He carried a leather portfolio under one arm and kept glancing around the house with quick professional eyes. Windows. Crown molding. Staircase. Measurements. My stomach tightened. Realtor. At my husband's funeral reception, my daughter-in-law had invited a realtor into my home before the flowers on Richard's grave were even dry. Vanessa noticed me watching and smiled brightly. Calmly. Perfectly. "Evelyn," she called sweetly, "I want you to meet someone who might help make the transition easier for everyone." The man extended his hand with the polished confidence of someone accustomed to walking through expensive homes and discussing them like inventory. "Daniel Reeves," he said warmly. "Vanessa mentioned you might be considering your next chapter." I looked at his outstretched hand for a moment before shaking it lightly. His palm was cold from the rain outside. "Did she?" I asked quietly. Vanessa stepped closer immediately, her smile smooth and practiced. "Daniel specializes in luxury properties in this area. I just thought it would not hurt to start exploring options early." Early. My husband had been buried less than 3 hours ago. I glanced toward the dining room where guests balanced paper plates and coffee cups while pretending not to listen. They all heard it. Every word. Some avoided my eyes entirely. Others watched me with uncomfortable curiosity, waiting to see whether the grieving widow would fall apart. Instead, I smoothed the sleeve of my black dress again and nodded politely. "How thoughtful." Vanessa relaxed slightly at my calm response. That was the thing about manipulative people. They depended on emotional reactions. Tears. Anger. Resistance. Silence unsettled them because silence gave them nothing to control. Daniel cleared his throat gently. "The market is very strong right now. Properties in this neighborhood usually move quickly." "I am sure they do," I replied. Jason suddenly appeared beside Vanessa, his expression tightening when he noticed the realtor standing there. "Vanessa," he muttered under his breath, "not today." She touched his arm immediately. "I am only trying to help your mother prepare." Prepare. Such a harmless-sounding word. Like organizing winter coats before the first snowfall. But I noticed the way her eyes drifted toward the staircase, toward Richard's office upstairs, toward the framed oil paintings and antique furniture she had admired for years with barely concealed hunger. Vanessa did not see this house as a home either. She saw assets waiting to be redistributed. The reception continued around us in uncomfortable waves of forced sympathy and low conversations. At some point, someone turned on soft piano music in the living room. The same instrumental playlist Vanessa had used at Thanksgiving last year after announcing she wanted to remodel our kitchen because it felt outdated. Richard had laughed quietly afterward and told me modern trends were usually just expensive ways of erasing history. I wandered toward the library while guests slowly began leaving. The room smelled faintly of old leather and cedarwood. Richard's reading glasses still rested beside his favorite armchair exactly where he had left them the night before his heart attack. Seeing them there nearly cracked something open inside me. 43 years. 43 years of routines so ordinary they felt immortal until suddenly they were not. I reached down and touched the glasses gently with my fingertips. "Mom?" Jason stood quietly in the doorway now. Without Vanessa beside him, he looked older somehow. More uncertain. "You should probably get some rest." I nodded faintly. "I will." He lingered awkwardly. "Vanessa means well." There it was. The sentence weak men always used when they were too afraid to confront the damage happening right in front of them. I looked at my son carefully. The boy who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard now could not even defend me in my own home. "Does she?" I asked softly. Jason opened his mouth, then closed it again. Upstairs, I heard footsteps moving across the second floor. Heavy. Unfamiliar. My eyes lifted immediately toward the ceiling. Jason frowned. "What is Daniel doing upstairs?" Before he could answer, Vanessa's voice floated down casually from the hallway above us. "I just wanted him to see the master suite and Richard's office before the lighting changes." My stomach turned cold. Richard's office. The only room in the house he kept locked. The room where he handled everything privately after retiring from Harper Capital. Jason looked uncomfortable now, finally realizing how inappropriate this had become. But it was already too late. Because somewhere upstairs, inside Richard's office, my daughter-in-law was searching for something she believed belonged to her. Jason rushed upstairs 2 steps at a time while I followed more slowly behind him, my hand gliding along the polished wooden banister Richard had refinished himself one winter after retirement. The house sounded different now. Hollow somehow. Every footstep echoed through rooms still heavy with funeral flowers and unfinished conversations. By the time I reached the second-floor hallway, Vanessa and Daniel were already standing inside Richard's office with the door fully open. The sight stopped me cold for a moment. Richard almost never left that room unlocked when guests visited. Not because he was secretive by nature, but because he believed private things deserved protection. His desk sat near the windows overlooking the backyard, perfectly organized as always. Leather-bound notebooks stacked neatly beside the computer monitor. Brass desk lamp angled precisely over. A yellow legal pad still filled with his handwriting. Seeing it untouched made my chest ache in a way I could not explain. It looked as if he might walk back into the room at any second carrying one of his coffee mugs and asking whether I wanted to sit outside before dinner. Vanessa turned quickly when she saw me in the doorway. For the first time all day, she looked slightly uncomfortable. "We were just looking around," she said lightly. Daniel closed his portfolio immediately, sensing tension he wanted no part of. Jason stepped between them awkwardly. "Vanessa, this is not appropriate." She crossed her arms. "I am trying to help your mother think ahead. Somebody has to." Her tone had sharpened now, the polished sympathy beginning to crack around the edges. I looked past her toward Richard's desk drawers. The bottom left drawer was slightly open. Barely noticeable unless you knew Richard the way I did. Unless you had spent 43 years watching him close every cabinet and drawer with quiet precision. Someone had searched through his desk. I walked farther into the office slowly, saying nothing. Daniel shifted uncomfortably near the bookshelf. "Perhaps I should head out," he muttered. "Smart man." Vanessa ignored him. Her attention stayed fixed on me now, studying my expression carefully, probably searching for weakness or confusion. "Richard would have wanted us to help you stay practical," she said softly. "This house is enormous, Evelyn. The taxes alone must be overwhelming." Taxes. Another word people used when pretending greed was concern. I rested my fingertips lightly against the back of Richard's leather chair. The chair still carried the faint scent of his cedar cologne. Suddenly, I remembered a conversation from almost 2 years earlier. Richard sitting in this very room late at night while rain tapped against the windows. "If anything ever happens to me," he had said quietly, "promise me you will not let people rush you." At the time, I laughed and told him he sounded dramatic. Richard rarely spoke dramatically. That should have warned me he was serious. Jason rubbed his forehead tiredly. "Can we please not do this tonight?" Vanessa turned toward him immediately. "Do what?" "Prepare? Be responsible." Then she looked back at me again. "You cannot honestly expect to manage all of this alone." I let the silence stretch between us for several seconds, long enough for discomfort to settle into the room. Vanessa hated silence. She always filled it too quickly. "Richard trusted me," I said finally. My voice came out calm and even. Her expression flickered almost imperceptibly. "Of course he did," she replied quickly. "But he also handled things differently than you would." There it was again. The assumption. The carefully crafted narrative that I had spent decades smiling beside my husband without understanding anything around me. As if being quiet meant being uninformed. My eyes drifted toward the bookshelf near the fireplace. One leather volume sat slightly crooked compared to the others. Richard never left books uneven on the shelves. Someone had touched that too. Vanessa followed my gaze for half a second before looking away too quickly. My stomach tightened quietly. She had not come upstairs to admire crown molding or office space. She had come searching. And whatever she expected to find in Richard's office, she had not found it yet. The house finally grew quiet a little after 9 o'clock. One by one, the guests drifted out into the rain carrying empty casserole dishes and folded umbrellas while murmuring the same soft promises people always make after funerals. "Call if you need anything. You are not alone." Richard was a wonderful man. Their headlights disappeared slowly down the long driveway until only Jason and Vanessa remained downstairs speaking in hushed voices near the kitchen. I stayed inside Richard's office with the door partially closed, sitting in his leather chair for the first time since he died. The room felt colder at night. Shadows stretched across the bookshelves while rain tapped steadily against the windows overlooking the backyard. Richard used to sit here long after midnight reviewing reports with jazz music playing softly from the old stereo near the fireplace. I could almost hear it now. The faint crackle of vinyl records. Ice shifting in his whiskey glass. The low hum of his voice when he read something interesting aloud to me even when I barely understood half the financial terminology. "You always understand more than you pretend to," he once told me with a smile. I thought about that sentence now as I opened the bottom desk drawer completely. Vanessa had searched through it carelessly enough to disturb Richard's perfect order, but she had not known what mattered and what did not. Most people assumed important things looked dramatic. Thick envelopes. Safe deposit keys. Large contracts marked confidential. Richard understood human nature better than anyone I had ever known. That was why he hid meaningful things inside ordinary ones. I reached beneath a stack of old utility records and removed a plain blue folder that looked almost laughably unimportant compared to the polished leather binders surrounding it. Inside sat a single folded sheet of paper in Richard's handwriting. "Evelyn, if you are reading this sooner than expected, then certain people probably moved faster than I hoped they would." I stared at the words for several seconds before continuing. "Do not panic. Do not argue. Most importantly, do not explain yourself. Let them reveal who they are before you reveal anything." My throat tightened painfully. Even now, Richard sounded calm, methodical, protective. I leaned back slowly in the chair and closed my eyes for a moment. 43 years together had taught me many things about my husband, but perhaps the most important was this. Richard rarely prepared for only one outcome. If he left me instructions, it meant he had anticipated exactly this kind of situation long before his heart ever failed him. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. I quickly folded the note and slipped it back into the folder just as Jason entered the office. He looked exhausted now, his tie loosened, the grief finally beginning to show through the tension in his face. "Mom," he said quietly, "Vanessa and I are heading home soon." I nodded once. He lingered awkwardly near the doorway. "I know today was difficult." Difficult. Such a small word for a day that felt like watching my entire life quietly rearrange itself around me. Jason rubbed his hands together nervously. "Vanessa is only trying to make sure everything is manageable for you." Again. Always Vanessa explaining my future before I had spoken a single word about it myself. I studied my son carefully under the warm office lighting. He looked more like Richard tonight than he had in years. Same tired eyes. Same stubborn jawline. But Richard had never mistaken kindness for weakness. "Did you invite the realtor?" I asked softly. Jason hesitated just long enough to answer the question before speaking. "Vanessa thought it might help us understand options." "Us. Not you. Us." The words settled heavily between us. Jason noticed my expression immediately and looked away toward the bookshelves. "Nobody is trying to push you out," he added quickly. Upstairs, the old grandfather clock chimed 10 times through the quiet house. Richard used to wind that clock himself every Sunday evening without fail. Jason glanced toward the hallway. "You should get some sleep." I smiled faintly. "I will eventually." After he left, I remained alone in the office listening to the rain and staring at Richard's handwriting again. Then my eyes drifted toward the bookshelf Vanessa had disturbed earlier. Slowly, I stood and walked over to it. One leather volume sat slightly forward compared to the others. I pulled it carefully from the shelf. Behind it was a small steel lockbox recessed into the wall. And for the first time that entire terrible day, I smiled for real. The lockbox was smaller than I expected, painted the same muted cream color as the wall behind the bookshelf. Richard always believed the best hiding places were the ones nobody noticed because they looked ordinary. My fingers rested against the cool steel for a moment while rain continued whispering against the windows behind me. Then I entered the 6-digit code I had not used in almost 7 years. Our wedding anniversary. The lock clicked open immediately. Inside sat 3 things. A sealed envelope with my name written in Richard's careful handwriting. A small silver key attached to a faded navy tag. And a thin black folder labeled Keller and Associates. I stared at the folder for several seconds before carefully lifting it from the box. Martin Keller. Richard's attorney. The same man who had handled every major business decision Richard made after selling Harper Capital. Suddenly another memory surfaced. Richard standing in the kitchen one evening while making coffee, speaking so casually I barely noticed the importance at the time. "If anything ever happens to me unexpectedly, Martin will help you understand everything." Everything. I opened the folder slowly and felt my pulse begin to quicken for the first time since the funeral. Inside were copies of legal trust documents, investment summaries, property agreements, and account structures so detailed they almost looked overwhelming at first glance. But Richard had organized them carefully with handwritten notes in the margins beside the most important sections. I sat down in his chair again and forced myself to breathe slowly while reading. The estate everyone believed belonged entirely to Richard had been quietly restructured years ago. Holdings transferred. Ownership percentages adjusted. Trust protections established. My eyes stopped on a number near the bottom of one page. $28,460,000 held inside an irrevocable trust under my sole authority. I leaned back slowly against the leather chair. Vanessa thought I was financially helpless. Jason thought I needed guidance. Even the guests at the funeral looked at me like someone waiting for instructions on how to survive. Meanwhile, Richard had spent years making certain nobody could corner me after he was gone. A soft laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Not loud. Not bitter. Just disbelief at how thoroughly everyone had underestimated me. Then I noticed another handwritten note clipped beside the trust summary. Let them speak first. People reveal their intentions when they believe you have no power. I closed my eyes briefly. Richard knew. Somehow, long before his heart attack, he had seen exactly what might happen after his death. The realization hurt more than I expected. Not because he prepared financially, but because part of him must have worried our own son would fail me. Downstairs, I heard the front door close. As Jason and Vanessa finally left for the night, silence settled heavily across the house afterward. Real silence this time. Not funeral silence. Not polite sympathy. Just the old familiar sounds of home. The grandfather clock ticking steadily in the hallway. Rain gutters dripping outside. Floorboards creaking gently with age. I remained in the office for almost another hour reading every page Richard left behind. The trust protected the house completely. Nobody could sell it without my approval. Nobody could force liquidation of assets. Most importantly, every major financial account required only my authorization now. Mine, not Jason's. Not any future executors. Mine. Around midnight, I finally opened the sealed envelope with my name on it. Inside was a single handwritten letter folded neatly in half. Evelyn, if Vanessa starts talking about downsizing before I am even buried, then I owe you $20 because apparently I was right. Despite everything, I smiled immediately. Richard's dry sense of humor survived even here. I continued reading more slowly afterward. You spent 43 years letting people assume I was the stronger one. Maybe that was easier for both of us. But the truth is simpler. I built companies. You built our life. Never confuse silence with weakness, especially your own. My vision blurred suddenly, and for the first time since the funeral, tears finally came quietly. Not because I felt abandoned. Because even after death, Richard was still protecting me. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the kitchen windows, turning the marble countertops pale gold. For the first time in 2 days, the house smelled less like funeral flowers and more like coffee. I stood at the stove making breakfast the same way I had every morning for decades. Bacon in the cast-iron skillet. Eggs scrambled slowly with cheddar cheese. Toast warming in the oven. The ordinary rhythm of it steadied me. Richard always said routines mattered most when life stopped feeling recognizable. Around 8:30, I heard tires crunch against the gravel driveway outside. Right on time. Vanessa entered through the front door carrying 2 paper coffee cups and wearing cream-colored cashmere that looked more appropriate for brunch than morning. Jason followed behind her looking tired and distracted, already checking emails on his phone before he even removed his coat. Vanessa smiled brightly when she saw breakfast on the table. You are up early, she said with almost theatrical surprise. I thought you might need more rest after yesterday. Yesterday. As if the funeral had been some exhausting social event instead of the burial of my husband. I placed plates on the table calmly. I have always been an early riser. Vanessa set one of the coffee cups beside me. Sugar-free vanilla latte. I remembered you like those. I thanked her politely even though she was wrong. Richard used to tease me because I hated flavored coffee. Vanessa remembered details selectively. Mostly the ones that made her look thoughtful in front of other people. Jason sat down heavily at the table and rubbed his eyes. Mom, you did not have to cook. I wanted to. He nodded absent-mindedly while scrolling through his phone again. Across from him, Vanessa removed a slim leather folder from her designer tote bag and placed it carefully beside her plate. My eyes lingered on the folder for half a second. There it was. Too early for sympathy visits. Too organized for casual conversation. Vanessa noticed my glance immediately. Nothing serious, she said lightly. Just some paperwork we thought might help simplify things moving forward. Simplify. Another harmless-sounding word people used when preparing to take control. I sat down slowly and spread strawberry jam across my toast while listening to the grandfather clock tick softly in the hallway. Nobody spoke for a minute or two. The silence unsettled Vanessa first, exactly as Richard predicted it would. Jason and I were discussing practical concerns last night. She began carefully. This house is beautiful, Evelyn, but maintaining something this size alone is a tremendous responsibility. Jason finally looked up from his phone. Vanessa just means we want to help. Help. Always help. I took a sip of coffee and nodded thoughtfully as if considering their concerns seriously for the first time. I suppose there is a lot to think about. Vanessa relaxed almost immediately. I watched the shift happen in real time. Her shoulders loosened. Her voice softened. She believed progress had been made. Exactly, she said warmly. And we found a wonderful senior living community about 20 minutes from here. Private cottages, walking trails, on-site medical care. Very upscale. She slid a glossy brochure across the table toward me. Smiling gray-haired couples stared back from the cover beneath the words Evergreen Meadows Luxury Retirement Living. I looked down at the brochure quietly. Yesterday, they wanted a realtor. Today, they brought brochures. Grief apparently moved quickly for some people. Jason cleared his throat awkwardly. Nobody is forcing anything, Mom. But he would not meet my eyes while saying it. Vanessa opened the leather folder next. There are also a few temporary authorization forms that could make finances easier while you adjust. There it was. The real reason for breakfast. I glanced casually at the top page. Limited financial access authorization. My pulse remained perfectly steady. Richard had predicted this too. Let them reveal themselves first. Vanessa slid a pen gently toward me with careful sympathy in her expression. You should not have to burden yourself with stressful decisions right now. I looked at the pen for several quiet seconds before lifting my eyes toward her. Then I smiled softly and reached for it. I picked up the pen slowly and turned it once between my fingers while Vanessa watched me with careful anticipation. Jason shifted uneasily in his chair beside her, staring down at his untouched eggs as though he already sensed something about this conversation was moving too fast. The morning sunlight streamed across the kitchen table, catching tiny dust particles in the air. Richard used to call this hour the honest part of the day because people had not fully arranged their masks yet. I looked down at the authorization forms again. The language was polished, but obvious once you understood financial documents. Temporary account access. Asset Coordination Authority. Property Consultation Permissions. Temporary. Coordination. Consultation. Words designed to sound harmless while quietly handing control to someone else. Vanessa leaned forward slightly. This would only help us assist you while things settle down emotionally. Emotionally. Everything came back to that. Their assumption that grief had made me incapable. I placed the pen gently on top of the papers instead of signing. I would like Martin Keller to review these first, I said calmly. The change in Vanessa's expression happened almost too quickly to notice. Just the slightest tightening around her mouth before the smile returned. The attorney? She asked carefully. I do not think that is really necessary for simple paperwork. Jason finally looked up. Mom has every right to have someone review it. Vanessa turned toward him immediately. Of course she does. I am only saying we are trying to make things easier, not complicated. Easier for whom remained unspoken. I folded my napkin neatly beside my plate and stood to refill my coffee. The kitchen suddenly felt very small despite its size. Years ago, Richard had renovated the entire room because I loved hosting family dinners here. Thanksgiving mornings. Christmas breakfasts. Birthday cakes cooling near the windows. So many memories layered into the walls that it almost felt cruel hearing people discuss my future inside the space, as if I were already halfway gone. Vanessa watched me carefully over the rim of her coffee cup. Martin probably has a very full schedule after the funeral, she said casually. I would not want you waiting weeks over something minor. Minor. 24 hours after burying my husband, my daughter-in-law was already trying to manage timelines around my finances. I walked back to the table slowly and sat down again. Richard trusted Martin completely, I replied. So do I. Silence settled across the kitchen for several long seconds. Jason rubbed his forehead again while Vanessa tapped one manicured fingernail softly against the folder. Tiny movements. Tiny cracks. Richard was right. People revealed themselves when they believed they deserved something. Finally, Vanessa forced another smile. Well, if that makes you more comfortable. Comfortable. Such careful language wrapped around impatience. Then her phone buzzed against the table. She glanced down quickly before trying to turn the screen away, but not before I saw the message preview. Daniel Reeves, couple from River Oaks interested if property lists soon. My eyes lifted slowly toward her face. Vanessa locked the phone immediately. Too quickly. Jason noticed nothing. He was already halfway back into his work emails again, hiding inside distraction the way some people hide inside alcohol. Vanessa slipped the phone into her purse and stood. We should probably let you rest today. I nodded politely. That would be nice. She gathered the paperwork, but left the retirement brochure sitting beside my plate as though planting a seed she expected to bloom later. Before leaving, she touched my shoulder gently. You do not have to go through this alone, Evelyn. I looked up at her calmly. No, I said softly. I suppose I do not. For a brief second, uncertainty flickered across her face. Perhaps she expected gratitude, weakness, dependence. Instead, I simply smiled the same quiet smile Richard used during negotiations right before the other side realized they misunderstood the entire situation. After Jason and Vanessa finally drove away, the house became still again. I carried my coffee upstairs to Richard's office and closed the door behind me. Then I reached for the phone on his desk and dialed the number written at the top of the black folder. Martin Keller answered on the second ring. Mrs. Harper, he said quietly, as though he had been expecting my call all along. I think, I replied while looking out across the rain-soaked backyard Richard loved so much. It is time we had a conversation. Martin Keller arrived the following afternoon carrying the same black leather briefcase he had carried for as long as I had known him. Even after 30 years as Richard's attorney, he still moved with the quiet precision of a man who understood the value of speaking carefully. I opened the front door before he had the chance to knock twice. Rain clouds hung low over the property again, turning the oak trees in the yard dark silver beneath the afternoon sky. Mrs. Harper, he said gently, removing his coat in the foyer. I was very sorry to hear about Richard. I nodded once and led him toward the office upstairs. The house felt calmer today. Cleaner somehow. As if the silence itself had settled after the storm of funeral guests and whispered assumptions. Martin paused briefly when we entered Richard's office, his eyes resting on the empty leather chair behind the desk. He loved this room, he said quietly. He trusted this room, I corrected softly. Martin gave the faintest smile before setting his briefcase on the desk. For the next hour, he reviewed every document Vanessa had brought me that morning. He barely reacted outwardly, but I noticed the tightening around his eyes with each page he turned. Finally, he removed his glasses and placed them carefully on the desk. These are remarkably aggressive for paperwork presented less than 24 hours after a funeral. I sat quietly across from him, listening to rain tapping against the windows again. I assumed as much. Martin folded his hands together. If signed, several of these forms would have granted broad temporary access to accounts, property decisions, and estate coordination authority. Temporary again. That word suddenly felt almost insulting. Would they have succeeded? I asked calmly. Martin looked directly at me. Not really. He opened the black folder from Richard's lockbox and turned several pages toward me. Richard spent years restructuring everything specifically to prevent outside pressure after his death. Hearing it spoken aloud changed something inside me. Until now, part of me still felt suspended between grief and disbelief, as though the last few days had unfolded around someone else entirely. But the documents spread across Richard's desk were undeniable. He had seen this coming. Martin adjusted the papers neatly before continuing. The irrevocable trust places all major holdings entirely under your authority. The house, investment accounts, private equity distributions, even the Aspen property. Aspen. Vanessa did not even know the cabin existed. Richard bought it quietly almost 10 years ago after I once mentioned how much I missed. Mountain winters. Martin slid another document toward me. Current total protected valuation sits slightly above $28 million. The number no longer shocked me the way it had last night. Instead, it felt strangely distant compared to the deeper realization underneath it. This was never about money alone. It was about dignity, control, assumptions. Downstairs, I suddenly heard the front door open, followed by familiar voices drifting through the foyer. Vanessa's sharp heels against hardwood floors. Jason asking whether I wanted takeout for dinner. Martin glanced toward the office door. Were you expecting them? No, I replied softly. But I think they were expecting me. A few moments later, Vanessa appeared in the doorway carrying a glossy folder and smiling before she noticed Martin seated at Richard's desk. The smile disappeared almost instantly. Oh, she said carefully. I did not realize you had company. Martin stood politely. Vanessa. Jason stepped in behind her looking equally surprised. His eyes moved from the legal documents spread across the desk to my calm expression and then back toward Martin again. For the first time since Richard died, uncertainty crossed his face instead of pity. Vanessa recovered quickly. We were just checking on Evelyn. Martin closed the folder slowly. Mrs. Harper is doing quite well, actually. Silence settled heavily across the room. Vanessa's eyes drifted toward the documents on the desk before returning to me. Careful now. Measuring. Recalculating. Richard used to say the most revealing moment in any negotiation was not when people gained power. It was when they realized they never had it to begin with. I folded my hands calmly in my lap and met my daughter-in-law's gaze without speaking. Then, very gently, Martin placed the trust summary directly on top of the desk where both of them could finally see the number. After her wealthy husband passes away, a grieving widow discovers that her daughter-in-law and son believe she is helpless, financially broken, and ready to surrender her home. But hidden beneath the silence is a secret fortune and a carefully protected legacy. This emotional drama delivers powerful family stories filled with betrayal, manipulation, inheritance tension, and quiet revenge. As the daughter-in-law pushes retirement brochures, legal papers, and real estate plans onto the widow only days after the funeral, shocking truths slowly begin to surface behind closed doors. With calm dignity and heartbreaking realism, these family stories reveal how greed can destroy trust inside even the closest households. Viewers who enjoy emotional suspense, hidden wealth twists, and realistic family conflict will connect deeply with these unforgettable family stories. The widow never raises her voice, yet every moment builds toward a chilling realization that changes everything. These gripping family stories end with a silent power shift nobody expected. Character 1. A 68-year-old white American widow with elegant silver hair and soft blue eyes. Wearing a refined black funeral dress and pearl earrings. Front-facing portrait with realistic skin texture and subtle grief expression. No cartoon. No cartoon. No CGI. No illustration. Cinematic natural lighting. Character 2. A 42-year-old white American woman with long blonde hair, sharp cheekbones, and controlled smile. Wearing an expensive cream cashmere outfit with elegant makeup. Front-facing portrait with cold calculating expression and realistic skin texture. No cartoon. No cartoon. No CGI. No illustration. 1. Inside a grand American funeral chapel during a stormy afternoon. A 68-year-old white widow with elegant silver hair, blue eyes, and a refined black funeral dress stands beside a polished mahogany casket with restrained grief and quiet strength on her face. Across from her stands a glamorous 42-year-old blonde-white daughter-in-law wearing an expensive black designer dress and pearl jewelry with a cold calculating smile and emotionally distant eyes. Nervous funeral guests sit silently in dark wooden pews while rain pours against stained glass windows. White lilies surround the casket. Cinematic tension fills the room like an emotional battlefield between two women fighting for power without speaking loudly. Moody dramatic lighting, realistic skin texture, emotional realism, luxury funeral atmosphere. Ultra-detailed American setting, shallow depth of field, realistic fabric texture, natural expressions, no illustration, no CGI. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. 122. Inside a luxurious suburban American kitchen during a quiet rainy morning. A 68-year-old white widow with soft silver hair tied neatly behind her head prepares breakfast alone beside a marble kitchen island. She wears a simple cream sweater, pearl earrings, and light natural makeup while staring thoughtfully toward large windows overlooking wet oak trees and a gray sky. Warm golden sunlight enters softly through the glass, creating emotional contrast against untouched funeral flowers and two abandoned coffee cups on the counter. Her expression carries loneliness, dignity, exhaustion, and hidden intelligence. The expensive kitchen feels peaceful yet emotionally empty after loss. Ultra-realistic domestic atmosphere, cinematic realism, emotional storytelling, realistic wrinkles, natural skin texture, polished wooden floors, cozy luxury home environment, no illustration, no CGI, no fantasy elements, realistic. American architecture and furniture design. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. 1, 2, 3. Inside an upscale modern cafe in a wealthy American suburb during late afternoon. A beautiful 42-year-old blonde white woman with sharp cheekbones, polished makeup, and controlled facial expression sits alone at a luxurious marble table reviewing luxury retirement brochures and real estate documents on a digital tablet. She wears an elegant cream cashmere coat, diamond bracelet, and designer handbag placed beside an expensive coffee drink. Her body language feels confident, calculating, emotionally detached, and socially sophisticated. Bright sunlight reflects through tall glass windows while wealthy customers blur softly in the background. The atmosphere feels stylish, cold, ambitious, and subtly manipulative. Cinematic realism, ultra-detailed skin texture, realistic hair, realistic clothing folds, shallow depth of field, modern upscale, interior, realistic luxury lifestyle, emotional tension hidden beneath calm appearance, no illustration, no CGI, no fantasy effects, realistic American suburban environment. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. 1, 2, 4. Inside a dark private office filled with wooden bookshelves, legal documents, and storm light filtering through tall rain-covered windows. A calm 68-year-old white widow with silver hair and composed expression stands beside an older male attorney while holding secret trust documents close to her chest. Across the room, a glamorous blonde daughter-in-law freezes in visible shock beside her nervous husband after realizing the widow secretly controls a massive hidden fortune. Emotional tension dominates the room. The widow appears quietly powerful while the younger woman struggles to maintain composure. Heavy rain outside creates dramatic reflections across the polished wooden desk and leather furniture. Ultra-realistic cinematic confrontation, detailed facial emotions, realistic luxury office interior, moody, dramatic lighting, realistic skin texture, natural body posture, emotional realism, high-end American estate atmosphere, no illustration, no CGI, no fantasy visual style. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. 1, 2, 5. Inside a silent luxury office late at night, illuminated only by a warm desk lamp and soft moonlight from tall windows. A dignified 68-year-old white widow with silver hair and tear-filled blue eyes kneels beside a hidden wall safe concealed behind dark wooden bookshelves. She carefully holds old handwritten letters and confidential trust documents left by her late husband while emotional memories fill the room. Her black silk robe and pearl earrings reflect subtle golden light as rain streaks softly across the windows behind her. The atmosphere feels intimate, emotional, reflective, and deeply cinematic. Leather furniture, antique books, and framed family photographs create a realistic, wealthy American estate setting filled with hidden history and quiet grief. Ultra-realistic textures, emotional storytelling, natural aging details, realistic hands, realistic lighting, soft shadows, no illustration, no CGI, no fantasy style, cinematic realism. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. 1, 2, 6. In the peaceful backyard garden of a massive American estate during sunrise, a graceful 68-year-old white widow with elegant silver hair sits quietly on a white wooden bench beneath tall oak trees, holding a handwritten letter from her late husband close to her chest. She wears a refined light gray wool coat, soft scarf, and pearl earrings, while morning sunlight glows gently across her calm face. The luxurious mansion stands behind her, surrounded by wet grass, stone pathways, and golden autumn light after rain. Her expression reflects emotional closure, quiet victory, wisdom, and peaceful strength after surviving betrayal and manipulation. The cinematic atmosphere feels deeply emotional, realistic, and visually rich with soft, natural lighting, realistic skin texture, detailed fabric movement, realistic American landscape design, shallow depth of field, emotional realism, no illustration. No CGI, no fantasy elements. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. 1-2.